Welcome back to The Political Bridge, the podcast where we explore the most pressing issues facing our nation from across the ideological spectrum. I'm your host, Ada, and today we're diving into a complex and often contentious area of immigration policy and federal-state relations. Our topic asks, should states be allowed to restrict ICE's ability to operate within their borders, specifically considering measures like halting the use of undercover license plates for federal agents? This isn't just a theoretical debate, it's playing out in real time across various states and municipalities, raising fundamental questions about sovereignty, public safety, and the enforcement of federal law. On one side, we have arguments centered on states' rights, local control, and concerns about civil liberties, particularly for immigrant communities. On the other, we hear calls for uniform federal enforcement, national security, and the necessity of tools like undercover operations for effective law enforcement. The use of unmarked vehicles and specialized license plates by federal agencies like Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, is a tactic designed to allow agents to conduct surveillance and operations discreetly without immediately identifying themselves or their purpose. When states or local jurisdictions move to restrict these tools, it creates a direct tension with federal authority. We'll explore the legal, practical, and philosophical underpinnings of these positions. With us today to navigate this intricate landscape are Nico, our conservative voice, and Jordan, our progressive voice. Nico, let's start with you. What's the conservative perspective on states restricting ICE's operational capabilities?
Thank you, Ada. From a conservative perspective, the answer is unequivocally no. States should not be allowed to restrict ICE's ability to operate, especially when it comes to essential tools like undercover license plates. This isn't merely about federal supremacy, it's about the fundamental principle of national sovereignty and the uniform enforcement of federal law. Immigration is a federal responsibility, clearly outlined in the Constitution. When states attempt to impede federal agencies like ICE, they are effectively undermining the nation's ability to secure its borders and enforce its laws. The use of undercover license plates is not some arbitrary tactic. It is a critical, proven law enforcement tool. It allows agents to conduct surveillance, gather intelligence, and apprehend individuals who pose a threat to public safety or national security without tipping off targets or compromising ongoing investigations. Imagine a drug trafficking investigation where local police were barred from using unmarked vehicles. It would be absurd and severely cripple their effectiveness. The same logic applies to ICE. These agents are often pursuing individuals with criminal records, gang affiliations, or those who have repeatedly violated immigration laws. To strip them of a basic, necessary operational tool is to handcuff them in their efforts to protect communities. Furthermore, such state-level restrictions create a patchwork of enforcement, leading to sanctuary areas where federal law is selectively ignored or actively resisted. This not only emboldens those who seek to exploit our immigration system, but also places an undue burden on neighboring jurisdictions and the federal government to compensate for these gaps. It's a dangerous precedent that erodes the rule of law and the principle that federal laws apply nationwide. We need consistent, effective enforcement to maintain order and security, and states interfering with these operational necessities is counterproductive and, frankly, constitutional.
Thank you, Ada. From a progressive viewpoint, states absolutely should have the ability to restrict ICE's operational methods, particularly when those methods, like the widespread use of unmarked vehicles and undercover plates, erode trust within communities and raise significant civil liberties concerns. This isn't about undermining federal law. It's about states exercising their legitimate authority to protect their residents and uphold local values, especially when federal actions are perceived as overreaching or harmful. The argument for state-level restrictions is rooted in several key areas. First, it's about community policing and trust. When ICE operates with such broad, often opaque authority, using unmarked vehicles that can be indistinguishable from local law enforcement, it creates a climate of fear and suspicion, particularly in immigrant communities. This fear makes residents less likely to report crimes, cooperate with local police, or engage with public services, ultimately making everyone less safe. Local law enforcement agencies often rely on community trust to do their jobs effectively, and aggressive, unannounced federal operations can severely damage that trust. Second, there are significant civil liberties implications. The use of undercover tactics, while sometimes necessary in specific high stakes criminal investigations, can be easily abused when applied broadly to immigration enforcement. It blurs the lines between federal agents and local police, leading to potential racial profiling and unwarranted stops. States have a compelling interest in ensuring that all their residents, regardless of immigration status, are afforded due process and are not subjected to arbitrary detention or surveillance. Third, it's a matter of local control and democratic accountability. States and municipalities are often on the front lines of managing the social and economic impacts of immigration. They should have a say in how federal agencies operate within their borders, especially when those operations directly impact local public safety, social services, and community cohesion. Allowing states to halt the use of undercover license plates is a reasonable measure to increase transparency and accountability for federal operations that have profound local impacts. It's about ensuring that federal power isn't exercised in a way that is detrimental to the well-being and rights of state residents.
Both of you have laid out compelling opening arguments. Nico, you emphasized national sovereignty and the necessity of these tools for effective law enforcement. Jordan, you highlighted community trust, civil liberties, and local control. My first follow-up question for both of you is this: how do you balance the undeniable need for effective law enforcement tools with the equally important concerns about civil liberties and community trust? Nico, how can ICE effectively do its job without these tools while still respecting local concerns?
Ada, the balance you speak of is crucial, but it must not come at the expense of national security or the rule of law. The idea that ICE's use of standard law enforcement tactics, like undercover vehicles, inherently erodes trust or violates civil liberties is a mischaracterization. These are not tools of oppression. They are tools of investigation and apprehension used by virtually every law enforcement agency, federal or local, when discretion is required. The argument that their use creates fear often conflates legitimate enforcement actions with harassment. ICE is tasked with enforcing federal immigration laws. When they are pursuing individuals who have committed serious crimes, who are repeat immigration violators, or who pose a flight risk, the ability to operate discreetly is paramount. If every ICE vehicle were clearly marked, every operation would be compromised before it even began. This would allow dangerous individuals to evade capture, posing a direct threat to the very communities Jordan is concerned about protecting. Furthermore, the notion of community trust cannot supersede the obligation to enforce federal law. While local police certainly rely on community cooperation, that cooperation is predicated on the understanding that laws will be enforced. If states create safe havens where federal law is openly flouted, it sends a message that certain laws are optional, which undermines the entire legal framework. The solution isn't to disarm federal agents. It's to ensure that ICE operations are conducted professionally and within legal bounds, which they already are. There are existing oversight mechanisms and legal avenues for addressing abuses. Restricting operational tools across the board is a blunt instrument that punishes legitimate enforcement and ultimately makes everyone less safe by allowing individuals who should be removed from the country to remain at large. The priority must be on upholding federal law and ensuring the safety and security of all citizens, and effective law enforcement tools are indispensable to that mission. We cannot sacrifice national security for a perceived and often exaggerated fear.
Nico, I appreciate your emphasis on national security, but the balance you speak of is precisely where the progressive argument finds its strength. The undeniable need for effective law enforcement tools cannot be a blank check for tactics that undermine fundamental rights or destabilize communities. When we talk about community trust, we're not just discussing a vague concept. We're talking about the practical reality that if people fear engaging with any authority figure, crime goes unreported, public health initiatives fail, and social cohesion erodes. The claim that ICE's use of unmarked vehicles and plates inherently doesn't erode trust is simply not borne out by the experiences of countless immigrant communities. When an unmarked van pulls up, and individuals in plain clothes or with minimal identification emerge, the immediate reaction is often fear and confusion, not an understanding of legitimate enforcement. This is especially true when ICE operations are not narrowly targeted at serious criminals, but rather at individuals with minor immigration infractions, or even those with no criminal record at all, as has often been the case. The idea that existing oversight mechanisms are sufficient to address abuses is also questionable. Given the documented instances of ICE overreach and the difficulty individuals face in navigating complex legal systems, especially without proper representation. States are not disarming federal agents. They are asking for transparency and accountability in how those agents operate within their borders. They are asserting their right to ensure that federal actions do not inadvertently create public safety hazards for their own residents by fostering distrust. The federal government has a responsibility to enforce immigration law, yes, but it also has a responsibility to do so in a manner that respects the rights and safety of all people residing in the United States, and that includes working cooperatively with state and local governments. When federal tactics actively undermine local public safety efforts, states have not just a right, but a duty to push back and demand more responsible methods. This isn't about creating safe havens for criminals. It's about ensuring that federal enforcement doesn't inadvertently create unsafe communities for everyone else.
Thank you, Jordan. Your points on community trust and local impact are clear. Nico, to Steelman Jordan's position for a moment, one could argue that a federal agency operating with full anonymity, indistinguishable from local law enforcement, could lead to a